comfortable, and we're talking about a sense of place, so I think that's exactly right. I think it's really easy to boil sense of place down to this idea of a beach motif at the beach, a chalet style in a ski town, but you also go a lot deeper than that. You're looking at the landscape, you're looking at kind of the soul of a property. Can you talk about what it feels like to get to clients, home or to a job site for the first time and sort of start to soak it in and see where you want that project to go?
Well, let me start by thanking you.
Of course.
For doing this and for inviting me to do this. Also, Becky and her team, Becky Birdwell.
Yes.
I think having been a participant in La Ciénaga Design Quarter since the beginning, it's a very important and very exciting sort of pivot to a new thing where there is such a wide, now such a huge presence of design in LA that it now just feels cute that we were here in our huddle, which made a lot of sense. To now expand it, there's so many amazing makers here who have moved from all over the place because of space, because of material. You can cast here, you can do all sorts of things you can't do anywhere else. So I feel very excited by the idea that, we're creating our own salone here for the West Coast and maybe for the States, which is kind of a great goal. So I feel very optimistic from the start here.
That's amazing.
So well done then. Thank you. And talking about sense of place, I knew this when it was Therian, before it became, God, I sound old, before it was even de Saint-Fournier's ownership and everything. And it's always been one of the iconic places in LA. So sense of feel of place. This one is kind of just pulsating with sense of place and a sense of history here. When
we were preparing for this talk, we were talking about you just kind of going out and standing in a field and looking at a landscape sometimes. What are you looking for?
Well, when you're kind of searching for a house, when you get to a project, my favorite thing is to go to the piece of property, right? There's two things. There's like the instinctual, animalistic me who sort of goes around grunting like a hedgehog or something, or each corner to try and figure out if it's a new ground up, do we have the placement right? Have we taken advantage of the view? Is the driveway long enough? Is there, all these different things. Like where can we do these moments? How's the landscaper's job going to contribute here? For an existing house, you kind of want this sense of like, okay, what can I do here? I know this is incredibly egotistical, but I think a lot of you probably have this. Is like, how can I make this better?
Yeah.
How can I get 125% out of this project? And you have to kind of pace out the land and feel it out and feel the house. Like, I want to do something that's different, of course. So, like, can I get the doorway to the side? Can I create an entrance?
We have an entry porch here. You created kind of a new entrance. What was this space before? We're looking at the after, but what was the intervention here that was so important?
So this space was actually enclosed before.
Okay.
These people rebuilt this house from the ground up, but they wanted a complete reproduction of their previous 1880s farmhouse. So they wanted it to look not like it had become a mansion, but they added about 60% more square feet downstairs and refigured the rooms inside to really work. It had been added on 1 million times during its life, but they wanted people to come. And the family that had owned it since the 19th century in Napa came and said, wow, it looks exactly the same. And is that me rattling? So anyway, it was really well done that way. But this had been enclosed at that period. So we went back to the original documents, which is kind of the second part to your... the second part for me, which is the research. Like when you get to a house, a lot of the research, not just on the piece of property, but on the neighborhood and what is the vibe, what's appropriate for this location, what can I learn, this was a gold mining town, or this was a fertilizing producing town, whatever it was.
How does that turn into a design solution, by the way? We need fertilizer here. We should.
So in fact, Yountville, where this house was, it was the Napa capital of of fertilizer. That's where everyone went to get the fertilizer. It's only recently this has become fancy with whatever the famous restaurant is. It's called the French Laundry. Okay, thanks. I was like, oh my God, we have to take the whole team out to dinner. Then I realized it's like $450 each. I was like, no, I don't think we're going there. You know, but that was it. To me, like creating the entrance is very important in it. So, like when I said I'd like to find a different approach to the house if I can do better.
I would say sometimes you were telling me before that that's creating outdoor rooms as well. So we have one of those. Where was this sort of sited on the landscape, and how did it change the way you felt about the house?
Well, it's interesting to say this was actually on the shadowy side of the house, which is kind of what I look forward to, because obviously with like this pale, pasty skin, I always want to kind of create an area where there's shade. Is really important to me. So this actually faced away from the sun towards this magnificent hillside with oaks and this grass that turns beige and summer with stone wall at the bottom. So it was a very pretty, bucolic place to just sit there and rock away.
For something like this, how far along was the project by the time you got to the job site? You were able to take a look and say, hey, I think this should be here. I think this would make your experience in this home better.
Maybe a little late. It's always that thing when you get there a little too late and all the openings have been decided and the big things. But there was enough here that we were really called in by the client to, I don't want to say temper the architect's very talented, Charlie Barnett from San Francisco, but to add another layer and to make it, because they, you know, they made things very big and I kind of wanted to reduce everything more to smaller scale and to be a little more historic looking than they'd set out.
Is the client, well, the client called you in, so they're willing to go on that journey with you. Is the architect excited to go on that journey with you?
I think it depends. I think callously, I think architects love when a designer who's been published shows up. Because it will get their work published probably more easy than any other way. So they take that as a gift, but it may be a, what do they call, something chalice, where you do, whatever the term. Because, you know, it's a complicated relationship sometimes. Like in this particular instance, they did a beautiful job of recreating this farmhouse. But there were things like, why didn't they center the fireplace in the living room? But it was too late. And then I was like, okay, it made sense. I kind of, there's a late photograph of an area we were able to capitalize from that. But I would say sometimes you have to be the reincarnation of Madeleine Albright here and like tiptoe. Sometimes they really appreciate the input. I think the bosses always appreciate the input. The project managers less so.
That's fair.
Because they're faced between the two. I think it's also, to be fair, it's really difficult to design a house from the ground up, to listen to all their needs. I want a potting room and this and that, and I want things and I don't want to be near the kids' bedrooms, but not too far. And, you know, so they're doing all this domino of all these requests from the client. Am I talking too fast?
No, you're good.
Okay. But, you know, they get all these things, and then I come along and want to move the doors or, you know, lower the doors, and they've thought about all this. And, you know, I can understand how deeply aggravating that could be, because they deal with the fixed stuff and we work with the mobile stuff. So we're used to shifting things around in our profession. They like a solid fixed sculpture to work with. So, and some are easier, and then some, the project's so beautifully designed that you just get out of the way and you're left with something great to do, as controlling as one might be. You know.
How do you start to broach that conversation? And you say, like, actually, I think the door should be over here. Can we move the window over here to center around this view? How much, I guess, like, do you tiptoe into that? Or is that something where you say, you know, this has to happen?
Well, I learned one hard and fast rule from Peter Panoia, one talk he gave in New York. He said, we agree from the get-go that we're going to have all our discussions out of sight of the client. So we go prepared. There's nothing worse than a client experiencing conflict between us and having to choose sides. I mean, it's difficult enough with your spouse who wants beige and the other one wants color. And so, you know, you really have to fix all that before. And it's not always possible, but you kind of have to do it, because otherwise it becomes ping pong. But I would say that one great question to ask maybe at the beginning is, tell me what the intent was here. How did you get to this?
Yeah.
I'm curious. But I mean, you try and not sound passive aggressive, but try your best. But I would say that you want to research it first. There may be a really good reason. Now, the fireplace has to be X number of feet away from so-and-so. So you're like, okay. Let me curdle away.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about sharing your vision, creating a mood. We have this great photo of you with giant tigers on the wall. How do you, well, first of all, what are you doing here in this image? But also, how do you just sort of set the mood and get the client excited about what you have in store for them?
This is going to sound like a canned answer to a client, but you actually need to stop and listen to the client, right? You have to, I'm sure my team's standing at the back is laughing their heads off at it. But you kind of have to listen to the client. So we always go in at least 2 people because we pick up different things.
Yeah.
And because you're trying to charm them and then they're taking, reading the body language or something. Or like, oh my God, when you mentioned budget, the husband looked away and everything. So, you have to listen. You have to listen to what they're not telling you. You have to like...
What do people typically leave out? Is there a common thing that people sort of like say loudly by saying nothing?
I think that they sometimes think that their secret pleasures shouldn't be brought up. It's not either chic or whatever. You have to somehow immediately bring down the tone, like puncture the balloon a bit, and like let them be themselves and try and encourage it, right? But listening to it is really important and really understanding what they want. And sometimes there are things that you can see that would be good in the project, but you save that for later. So you listen, and what are their boundaries? And what are they really telling you? They don't like pattern, but they don't mind pattern if it's in the front hall, but they don't want it in their bedroom, or, so you kind of have to do a little bit give and take. And then with that, we go back and say, like, look, they hate red. And of course, I only want to do red with that in mind. But then, they hate red, so, let's nix that, and let's do this and that. So you go with this information, and you look at actually what you're faced with, what the house, the land is, and then you try and combine it. And so you start pulling pictures, and I think people want to see pictures. They want to see inspiration. They're not used to now. Plus now, I mean, I don't know about you all, but like getting a meeting with a client is becoming increasingly challenging. They want to just be fed things over the internet. I guess they date that way, so why wouldn't they do this? So, that's really way challenging because you really need to sell them. Clients do not really visualize things as well. If they visualize things really well, they wouldn't need to hire you. They would just go do it themselves. But, you have to figure that they need some persuading. Yeah. And not just pictures. They have to understand why you're doing it there. So I have to say, that's one thing that I just try and encourage all the time is to make meetings on site.
So do you want them to come to you? Do you want to go to them? What does that look like?
Well, it depends, obviously. Yeah. If it's a hole in the ground, you only do it once at first, and then you can build up. But I think we definitely do all the presentations on site because they make very little sense otherwise.
Tell us about these tigers. I think it's a pretty extraordinary installation. Who was that? Was that for a client, or who was that for?
Well, the tigers are actually bought to hoard.
Okay.
But that's not one of the chapters in the book, but it should be actually in toolkit is hoarding. But I bought those at an auction here at Abel's auction house, and then I saved them rolled up under somebody's desk, and then we were working on this project and thinking okay, we can sell these. This was for a project in Dallas actually, and this would be really good. And the client ultimately rejected them, but we're working here on the plans and pictures and how we were going to work it all out. This living room there.
So this is kind of assembling the vision to show the client.
Yeah, we love cork. We try and shove cork on everything because I love to pin. I unfortunately even just get impatient and put it in the drywall. So the drywall kind of looks like these little pock marks. What's it called? Microderma.
Oh, yeah.
right?
You're doing that
That's
to your
what all
drywall.
our things
Yeah.
look like.
When you're talking to a client about sense of place, you know, we were talking earlier about this idea that sometimes there are just things that make sense. You have a beach house on the beach. You have kind of a lakefront aesthetic on the lakefront. How are you responding to sort of the cues of the environment, the needs of the client, and sort of melding those together? Do clients ever say, I want a beach house on the lake, or whatever it is? You know, is there a little bit of education that has to happen there?
Yes, there's certain people that, I mean, one of my favorite jobs, or one of my favorite clients, was this couple in Newport Beach. And I walked in, and they had like, you know, the original houses in Newport Beach on the water were not fancy.
Did I do that? We just went to black, but...
Probably just as well. They're all looking, thinking, where are the Emperor's new clothes here? But basically, we arrived, and there was a very attractive guy, and he had paddle boards and surfboards, and he was very outdoorsy, and the house was on the water. And they were building, they showed me the plans, and I was like, tell me what was the intent here? Because they were building like this mini Italian villa on the water for this man who was clearly what you call a waterman. I think that's what they call them. And like, what are you doing? And he said, no, I didn't go there. But I said, what's the intent here? And he said, well, originally Lido, with all these really naff names like Via Carlotta and Via, I don't know what, all these Italian names, Via Zurico and whatever, you know, the theme was Italy.
Okay.
Always sells in Orange County. And sorry if anyone here's from Orange County, I love Orange County. But I said, well, it doesn't look like you. I said, what do you mean? I said, you're a man who loves the sport. You've just told me you have a museum of surf in San Clemente, that you do all these books on surfing, and you support umpteen surfers. This doesn't feel like that at all. It feels out of place and not in sync with you. So to me, the immediate sense of place was the sea, the water.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you paid for. You know, let's plank everything. And it was during the recession of 2009, whatever. And the carpenters, I think, had a little thing of me with like burning joss sticks because they were all out of work. And here was somebody actually doing a lot of millwork, every surface millwork. So it's got to look like a boathouse, right? And they got it. But, you know, they'd gone down some esoteric viewpoint. So to me, the sense of place, tradition does have a word to it, but the tradition was entirely wrong for the setting, going back to 1970 or 60s. And, you know, going to a much more coastal thing made sense. So to me, the sense of place, you cannot fight the sense of place.
Have you ever?
Well, I have a client at the moment who's lovely, I adore, and we're redoing with Titchener Thorpe, wonderful architects, these two apartments put together on sort of empty nesting, let's say, on one floor for mobility. And it's a 1970s building, and the person said, oh, I want it to be like I'm living in Venice. And I thought, great, thinking, you know, Sea Ranch, the Geary buildings, early Geary buildings in Venice. And I started like spouting all this crap off the hip, shooting for it. He said, no, he purred. Venice, Italy. I want to think I'm living on the Grand Canal. And I was like, okay, with slightly widened eyes, as wide as my Botox eyes could go without a thing. I was like, thinking. And he was like, no. Like, and I was like, really? And I was looking at, it was 7'6" ceilings. I was sort of just like, okay, I need to think about it. So I went home and I started thinking about what that really meant. And then I started with Peggy Guggenheim's Palazzo, that's kind of modernist in a thing. And we love Peggy Guggenheim, but not her Palazzo. I thought, shit. I said, these wonderful, you know, then I was thinking about the elements of Venice terrazzo floors and Murano glass and, you know, all this stuff, and started and looking at Portalupo's work in Milan, and, you know, just like researching, getting things that I could try and basically do what I think only decorators can do. They have to, is fit a square peg into a round hole, you know, sometimes. I mean, I would never have gone there, but I think it's actually going to pull off looking really good. And you just never know. And I'm like, oh, look at that sea, we need to connect. And then he finally said, no, 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 more Venice, more Venice, more Venice. I said, look, for the housewarming, we're just going to bring in 6 gondoliers with their things. We're going to have them pace up and down in the water in front of your apartment, play
You'll just feel like
Vivaldi,
you're in
do
Venice all the time.
fireworks, and
Yeah.
that'll be it. Okay,
Yeah.
there's only so much I can do for you. But yes, there are times when you have to veer off course, and it's kind of a bit awkward at first. Because for me, the sense of place, either it's like being part English and part French and part New York or American, it just, things feel traditional to me to a certain place, and fighting that is hard. Like, I don't want to do a Georgian house in Palm Springs.
Right.
I just don't.
Well, tell me a little bit more about sort of that backbone of architectural history. We've got a photo here of Stowe, but I know that was such a grounding force for you in the way you think about sense of place, the way you think about the role of architecture.
Well, if you buy the book, there is, and let me tell you, there
You
are
all
only
should,
very
by the
few
way.
books
It's
left,
incredible.
just so you know, after this is the book. But there's a picture of me looking really kind of difficult and bitchy in front of another school, which was what we call in England my prep school. This is what we call my public school, and which is like high school. And my mother clearly only picked my schools for their looks. I mean, I remember going to interview here, and there was an enormous 3-mile-long driveway of double alley of huge 18th century elms. She gasped, and I looked up, and there was this huge tunnel of elms. So she was done for just at that moment. It didn't matter how many people got into Oxford and Cambridge or not. It didn't matter to her. It was just really beautiful. And it was. And they say that the curse for all old Stoics, as we're known, is that we try and replicate the glory of our school life for the rest of their lives, with much mixed results. But so for me, the architecture kind of just got ingrained, and somehow I love making things. So that's kind of probably where the architectural part was. And I love digging into a plan and figure out. And I feel that narratives and floor plans are sort of often very cookie cutter, because people do spec houses, which is kind of what most people usually buy houses as, rather than custom built, are very cookie. Now everyone has a great room off the kitchen, and then there's sort of, 12 by 22 living room, in an 8,000 square foot house. So I try and change that to my way of thinking. And so that gives me a lot of satisfaction. I think that I can slightly improve on that, but that's complete ego speaking. And sometimes it's it's like chasing windmills, like Don Quixote trying to do it. But it's really, so I love like impacting the whole architecture, because I feel like this is a ground up house we did in Aspen with Mark Appleton, which was a real privilege to work with. And we got to choose all the interior, and it was a very collaborative project. And the client was very, very invested. It's one of those wonderful projects where the husband is really into it. No stone is left unturned. No dollar is pulled, or is not spent. So all these were made from barns outside, but the decorating lift is so much less if you can fix the architecture. So you have the walls to furnish on. So there's a wall for the TV that doesn't.
You did the work at the beginning.
Yeah, all that's thought out. It's kind of resolved. The way you decorate, right? Maybe somebody else decorates another way. But, this was done so we could back in the whole intention of the project was from the get-go.
You said the husband was very enthusiastic in this process, but going back to that idea of kind of actively listening to your clients, you told me this project had sort of different inputs from each spouse. Is that true? Or different professionals can hear different things. Sorry.
Yes, I think you hear the wife wants certain things and figures other side. The husband maybe in this instance, the husband wanted to be way further away from the children. And I was like, this is far away. No, that's the way he wants it. But he was very thoughtful. He's a sort of real estate investor and hotel owner. So for him, he approached the project in that way. He wants to see the full package. And it's one of my favorite projects, I have to say.
What is working that way, or what does the client come in with that expectation require of you? Did you have to work differently to sort of?
God, I had to row so badly with this one. He actually said to my receptionist one day, he said, "Do you think Peter's up for this job? Do you think he can do it?" And I was like, "This is the third project I've done for you." You know, so yes, you had to like, on all of them, you often have to row and prove yourself each time, you know.
We're pivoting to a different room here, but kind of along that idea of kind of having everything resolved, having a place for everything. When you've done that to the bones of the house, how does that create opportunities when you get to the decorating phase?
Well, in this room, just to be honest, the main thing I did architecturally in this room was punch those two windows either side the fireplace. It took me about 10 or 15 years to get through. The husband just didn't want to do it. The wife said yes from the get-go. She was a wonderful person, and so is he. And I said, you know, those windows will just transform this room. It'll bring the western light in. It's overlooking the pool. It's going to transform the room. And you can't tell that we've done it. You absolutely
What did
can't.
they do for the first 15 years?
No, the first like 30 years they lived there. No, the 15 years they resisted.
Okay.
Or he did. But I don't know, and the thing, and the thing, and the thing. I said, no, let me punch those freaking windows in. And they transformed the room. It changed the quality of the light, the orientation, the interest, the livability of the room. Like, he spends much more time in this room. Unfortunately, he's a widow now, but if anyone's single, let me tell you, he's a catch. You know, this is the one house in LA that I would love to have, I have to say. It's incredibly charming in the hills. But just doing that very subtle change just did everything to me for that.
And just change the way that they feel, or that he can feel in that room
and
as
then
well?
the quality of the light changed, so the quality of the colors you use in the room changed, and how you lay it out. So,
I mean, so this room evolved once those windows appeared. What's kind of the most fundamental shift to get to this place?
Except like hitting them with a hammer.
No. I just mean once the windows went in, how were you able to decorate the space differently for them?
Oh, lighter area. I had to do much less work, to be honest. The furniture had to do much less work because the room suddenly came alive, and the room is a gorgeous room with that 20 ceiling and every detail preserved. But it was just a little dull. It was a little depressing, like a Spanish houses can be a little bit, you know? And then it just became joyful.
That's amazing.
You know?
I want to talk to you about creating surprises. This is you peeking out from, we have a different tiger.
Yeah, tiger's my narrative.
Tell me a little bit about creating moments of surprise.
Well, you know, the experience of a house, I think, needs to be paced, right? You need to withhold at the beginning, you need to give a certain, and then a crescendo at the end, right? So in this particular instance, you know, the surprise was kind of, I desperately wanted to hide a door that you could see from the living room, talk about unresolved architecture, through the living room, the entry, the kitchen, through the dining room, straight into the butler's pantry. And I was like, no, this is just one step worse than a powder room. So I kind of bullied them into letting me put a jib door in. And then, by coincidence, I found this magnificent tiger. They used to do those when you went to India, and you'd bag a tiger, whatever they call it, and they would do a portrait of the tiger for you. And then the taxidermists would come and do their trick and whatever. So this is actually a 19th century tiger that I found at Christie's East or something, whatever it was called then. And then I've separately found the frame, because I went to Brimfield, and Shane from Big Daddy's Antiques bought this gigantic frame. And I said, do you still have that frame? He said, yeah, I didn't know what to do with it. I said, I'll buy it. So we retrofitted around. But it created this sense of like drama.
And then you cut it in half, right?
And then I cut it. Well, no, the thing is full length of the room.
Okay.
But I hid the door with it. And I just liked the surprise that you could pop out of it. And there's me impishly looking to see how you're dealing with it. But yes, whenever you can, you just try and create surprises.
Tell me about, we have this bedroom, super patterned bedroom, but, you know, playing with shadows, playing with light and dark. What did this room bring to this home?
So this was the same house, and it was a ground-up spec house in Atherton. and it had these very big volumes. And these clients and I bonded 20 years ago because they'd spent a year traveling in India after graduating from law school. And so they had a connection to India, and they, as a result, kind of saw some of my patterns or work. And then, so they wanted to go for it. This was actually the maybe third house I did with them. And so it was this big kind of cold cavernous space. So I thought, let's just go for it. Let's just make it rich and layered and patterned in what I consider a livable way, but other people might just go like, oh God, I can't stand all the pattern. But we kind of made them a sort of Indian room where all the sort of things just somehow feel accumulated.
Yeah.
So the use of pattern there humanizes the scale of the room, and it looks really like leaves, so it connects you to the outdoors, which is like Northern California. I'm always amazed by the trees. So I'm always trying to grasp onto them.
In this same house, you have a much more restrained bedroom as well. Can you tell me about sort of the push and pull between the two?
Well, I think that that's the thing that I always like, is kind of, smooth and textured, light and dark. Doggy rooms get more pattern and color than wonderful, light, airy rooms where you want to celebrate the light and the freedom, the airiness. So this is actually a room in that house that was with the lovely windows I punched out. So, I like also a lot of simplicity. To me, that's a very simple room. There's just a few patterns. If you get bored of them, you can change them. But it's just much quieter and easier because the room was so airy and light. Had so much charm.
You were talking about moving walls, creating different kind of zones of space in a home. This is an entry hall that you created.
Yes, so
why would you fight for space? Yeah.
So I'm rolling my eyes because this is one where the relationship with the architect, who I happen to find, who I happen to recommend for the job, said, you can come in later and just push some cushions around.
Oh.
And I was like, So anyway, this was a house on a lake in Montana. And obviously the glory and the money shot, as they call it in the porn industry, is the view of the lake. It's fantastic. But I didn't want to hit people over the head. I wanted to delay it. So this was another room. And they had something coming in on the deck. I said, no, you've got to give me a moment to celebrate your architecture. I said, just delay. Let's delay the view. Let's delay the...
So when you walked into this house originally, you just saw the lake.
You basically, where the camera is a staircase that goes down to the lake level, where the reception rooms are. But just coming in, the staircase, the thing, there are too many senses. You've got to make sure you don't fall down the stairs. You're looking at the view. You're kind of clocking other things. But this gives you a moment to understand the narrative of the architecture, to look at my fabulous decorating, and then you can go down the stairs. People can't handle too many choices. Visually, too many senses. You can't just give it all to them at once.
Did you have to really fight to have this kind of cadence established in?
Yes, probably more with the client.
Okay.
Than I did with the architect, because I did the purring right thing to say to him. But I think once I'd said it and the space was done as a sort of mini barn, it looked glamorous enough and special that, wow, most people in Whitefish, Montana don't have this entrance. So you're like, wow, what's going on here? And then you go down and then there's it's like a concerto. Then there's more, you've got to like pace it, I think, as a designer.
And sometimes, you had said that the exterior can sort of do that work for you.
Yeah, if there's nothing inside. I mean, I love a front hall because it gives you a sense of like, stop. I went to, Nathan Turner's shop next door. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It smelled so rich, I told him. It was delicious. He said, it's Ojai oranges. It's our signature scent. So, but it gave a pause. Obviously, he doesn't have the front hall, but the idea is, what's the first effect? So when you're coming into a house, you kind of want to be able to, you sometimes want to change it for the seasons. You want to do a fall thing, Christmas, whatever. But, having some sense of delay before you come in, again, it's like the manipulation. You manipulate the senses as much as you can. So if you can't find the space indoors, you have to use it outdoors. Or the front yard, the landscaper works with you to create like an entry experience.
You talk in the book so much about this idea of kind of establishing a narrative, creating a vibe. And one of the things that I thought a lot about was this idea of, is vibe the end result? Or is vibe sort of a means to create something more meaningful?
Oh, totally an end result. To me, this sense of vibe, creating a vibe. I mean, when you're taking a new spec house, to create a vibe in a house, to actually give it personality and soul and all the other things that a vibe are, and a sense of authenticity in its neighborhood and authenticity for the people who live there. I mean, there's nothing worse than going to a house that just does not look like that. They're like, the husband's 4'6" and the ceilings are like this, and you're like, what are you thinking? You know, so you've got to make it flattering for them, but essentially you've got to be, it's got to look authentic. And then the vibe, you can modulate the excitement up and down with color pattern and all the other tools that I talk about. But vibe is definitely the end goal. Like, you want a house to like be throbbing with atmosphere. I mean, I always say you want to be the house that all the kids in at least middle school want to come to hang out in your house. You know, when they're in high school, they want is the pot. Whoever parent has the most, you know, pot in their house. But literally, whether it's a full refrigerator, every drink they want to have, I think that makes for a joyful house, you know, versus a dead-feeling house, right?
You talk a lot about sense of togetherness in the book as well, and really creating moments that bring people together. And we have these two images of offices that I think were in the same house. Can you talk a little bit about this project and about kind of how you had to fight for moments of togetherness in this home?
Well, interesting enough, these are other techies, so they tend to love being separate, right? I mean, they just love it. But yeah, you try and create spaces, in particular the one on the left, that are relatively small for people to be in. And you have to give them a strong sense of purpose. So you've got to really pull people. You know how in restaurants, you want that booth over there, and you don't want to be but this door by the kitchen entrance or whatever. Like, that booth is the destination that everybody wants to go to. So you have to create that in a house so that people want to nestle there. They want to, even, God forbid, spend time with their parents, you know, or their mother-in-law, whatever it is, whatever difficult relationship you might have. But, you know, you have to create these areas that people feel good in, that suit them.
What does it take to kind of create the moments of, I guess, expansion and contraction, right? Like a retreat for yourself, but then a space to gather. How are you balancing those in a project?
I think it's on a case-by-case basis. You know, it depends on the client and what their goals are. I think most people want some kind of getaway room, right? I mean, I think we all feel that. Like, you know, I know that my partner and I have you know, he has a room where he does his meditation, and I call it flapping around in the morning doing yoga. And then I have another space where I can do my own thing. So there's, for every couple, I think there's a space that they need to be able to take room and make their own mess. And whether it's any of these things, sometimes it's just a wonderful bathroom, you know, whatever, however people's rest moment is really important. Versus, how are they really going to use areas to eat in? I mean, you know, you can't have somewhere that you're going to use all the time that's like more than 15 feet from the kitchen stove.
You just teed me up perfectly, because I was going to ask you about formality, especially in dining.
Unrehearsed.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, but you have, we've talked about kind of wrestling with how formal someone should live. You know, we have a picture of a very elegant dining room, but also really, I think you do a lot of work to help people get comfortable with maybe the idea that they're a little bit slouchier in real life, or that they live a less kind of sit up straight life. What does that conversation look like in your work?
Well, I think it's part of like your internal questionnaire of like, how do you like to entertain? What is your job? What does make sense? This particular house, they were fortunate to have several different options.
Okay.
They had a very nice area kind of in off the kitchen. They had a really nice outdoor area or two. And then they had this long room, which was kind of like slightly weird to furnish. I said, let's put the dining room there. And it was close to the kitchen. And so we kind of went for it, you know. I even went, it's the only client who ever let me this, but, you know, she said, I just hate rentals. You know, she meant for like entertaining. So I bought her like two different identical place settings for 50 people. Wow. So that she can do buffets with her own sterling flatware. So they thought about it. But they entertain. They do fundraisers. They do work stuff. You know.
It made sense for their life.
It made sense for their life. They're younger. You know, they're actually the people who introduced Kamala Harris to her husband. So, you know, they're
like in
what
the
do they
mix
call
like
it?
that, right?
Stockers.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they're like, so they needed a big room. And in fact, I found that table at Bonham's. It was one of those things that a dealer's never going to buy. I mean, it was stretched to 28 feet or something. And we cut it down and did surgery and moved all the legs so it all fit. But that table alone, I think, is like 20 feet long or something. Wow. Yeah. But to talk about slouchiness, like those chairs which we made from a sort of French 20s model we copied are actually very comfortable. It's indoor-outdoor velvet, believe it or not, so that they didn't have to worry about, you know, mess and greasy fingers. So we try and like make it work for both.
Are there some clients who you would say to them, you know, you don't need a space like this if you're just, if the only thing when you close your eyes is like a holiday dinner once a year, maybe this isn't the best way to live in your home?
Yes, I think so. I mean, part of the thing I find is now, because going back to, you know, my bête noire of spec houses, is the only way they really make money is by adding as much square footage as the county will let them. And it happens everywhere. And then you have all these absolutely useless rooms, like 2 family rooms, a music room, a billiards room. I mean, what? We're not Downton Abbey here. Everyone just ends up living in their bedroom, you know, and doing everything in their bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen. So, you know, sometimes you have to really be inventive with what you use for rooms. And I mean, I could see a ping pong table in that room and being fun, you know, just depended on the people.
Yeah.
But you have to kind of like figure out what's going to work and not be artificial. So it goes back to authenticity.
Yeah.
You know, if you understand the person, you know.
We have this soaking tub talking about personal retreats a little bit. Who is this for?
This actually, if you see it in the book, the photograph looks utterly fake because it's sort of towards sunset, and that's in Ojai, and the background looks like it was photoshopped into. But it's the most incredible. The client, who's actually who's a philanthropist for a lot of nature causes and land stuff, like she says, it's so great. I just go out there with a glass of wine, and the owls come sweeping down over my head from the oak trees, and it's just genius. That's one of the things. That's one of my favorite pictures in the whole.
Is it?
Book. And honestly, I did not do much decorating there, did I?
What was it, though, that you were picking up from this client that made you say, this is what they need?
Oh, no, she wanted it.
Okay,
I
she
can't
came
take
in,
credit. And I said, okay. And I thought, is she really going to use it every day?
That's so funny.
It's like her favorite decompress time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We also have an art space for a family here. How did they use this space, and how did these 2 rooms come about?
So these are both in the same house. It's a house I worked on with Paul Williger. And it's a young family, and it was a house from 1905 that was moved in the early 20s from Brentwood to Santa Monica. And it sits on this wonderful piece of property. It's another people where we had to preserve the house, thank God. And then so we went every which way to expand it for a young family. And even a basement karaoke room I did in this thing, because they mentioned karaoke semi-shamefully as their like fun place. I said, let's put one in the basement. $1 million later, it's their favorite space. But so the room on the left, the woman
room,
is a painter. So she actually mentioned that she likes to paint, and I said, well, we have these little outbuildings. Let's just move the pool equipment from it and like give you a little art studio. And all that mess is genuine. I know you're thinking that I'm not being truthful. But I said, do not move one thing to the house manager. I want the room exactly as it is, with all the like residue and full rubbish bins and everything. This is her sort of happy private place with 2 young kids. This is where she goes to do her decompression. And on the right, it's really the sort of the couple's getaway from, you know, a household of 6, whatever, the kids and nanny and whatever, where they can just like take a moment. You know,
That's beautiful.
I mean, so in my head, I'm like thinking, this is where you're going to read the New York Times on Sundays. This is where you're going to think. I mean, they don't do anything of the kind, but they just sit there on their phones and check their things, and like that's
There's magic in that too.
That's what, you know, listening to Business of Home podcast is, you know, what the reality really is. Yeah.
That's amazing. I want to talk really quickly as we wind down. And if anybody has questions, I think we have a few minutes for questions, so gather them now.
Oh, God.
You're going to be fine. The book is extraordinary. As you were making this book, how did defining what was important to you, and you know, the process of putting that into kind of a bound object, change the way you think about what makes your work successful, or change the way you thought about the work?
It's complicated doing a book. I'll parrot Jeffrey Marks, who was here just before, who did a Dennis Scully podcast, and said it's the quickest way to go bankrupt. And like projects out there, some people have gone bankrupt decorating their houses. But I think it's a way that you step back. Like, I was really lucky, and I worked with Stephen Drucker, who used to be editor-in-chief in many magazines at Hearst, Martha Stewart Living, Town and Country, House Beautiful, who's sort of a legend. And he's part of the Vendome publishing house, doing his own imprint there. And he really believed in me much more than I did in, you know, that I considered myself worthy of having a book or not. At the time, I was like, there are a lot of people who have a lot bigger body of work who don't have a book. But then I thought, my God, they might stop asking me soon. I better do it. And, you know, it was a great way because we had enough unpublished work that we could go. So he said, look, just step back, photograph everything that looks good to you and pin it up on the wall. And a bit like the tiger thing, you kind of work it out on the walls. And, you know, it's had a lot of correlation between like budget. I don't think my CFO is here, but basically there was a lot of correlation between budget of doing the shoots and the organization and what you were getting out of it and what was worth it. And then putting it together and really editing it is very much kind of how we approach what I call the 75-25 rule, which is 75% organizational in a project and 25% serendipity, finding the tiger at auction one day. So, you know, it's quite similar in a weird way. But looking at it and organizing it, I didn't want to do a portfolio book with project by project. I just didn't think that it would stand up to the magnifying glass. So mixing it into themes was much more appealing to me. I love the idea of like, why is it that I use pattern or color? And like, those are the things that excite my eyes, but then what is it as a tool and what does it achieve? So kind of that's what the book explores. And you know, I didn't want to be self-congratulatory about it, but the woman who designed the book, who was an utter genius, Orly, who's here, who pushed me off the windowsill of this, triangulated me with Stephen Drucker to do the book, and somehow concocted this. When we were shown each chapter, it's true. I mean, our mouths dropped when she came out with the design. And let me just do a test chapter for you to see how it looks. Combining textile designs with chapter headings, with the photographs. It just somehow fell together. You know, it was almost like you brought in somebody to re-look at your work in a different way. So part of it is giving it up. It was great. I was like, God, that looks good. And, you know, I was fearing that it was a little slutty with too many pictures of my fabrics in it. But honestly, she paired them so well that that's a lot of the feedback I've had for the books, how beautiful it is. And I cannot take credit for it. I can take credit for the work and maybe participating in the photography, or it can take credit really for a lot of that and for writing. But she was a genius. I was very lucky. And Stephen, you know, at 30,000 feet altitude, was giving directions that we would sometimes have a day's session working on the book editing. Said, no, we have to change the order. I mean, right? I mean, it was like, was watching like a master class in doing it. So there were correlations. It's a creative thing, doing a book. And I think what we all do and what turns us on is not the invoicing day or the sales tax day. It's really about the 10% creative part that we have in all our lives that get us excited, you know, so there are correlations. Yeah.
Do we have questions from the audience?
Yeah, it's time for questions.
Questions?
Becky, love you.
Yes.
Here you go.
Yes.
I'll go first. So we want to make sure everybody can sign your,
Yep.
your books.
Hello, thank you for the wonderful interview. Peter, I would like to tell you that I got to know about you 1 month ago when I asked ChatGPT who are top 10 interior designers in Los Angeles.
Seriously?
And you were among them.
What number was I?
So the question is, I'm an interior designer and live here only for a month. And I'm from Russia, and in Russia I worked with stars and with TV programs, and I know that you have been working with stars. The question is, I would like to know the inner kitchen, if you think that it is convenient to answer. So when you are working with stars, what kind of collaborations with brands do you do? For example, a stars come to you and she says, I want a wonderful interior design. Are any brands that give some furniture just for free, for promotion?
It's a great question, and nobody's ever asked me that question. And I remember this really like A-list couple coming to me, and I went to their house to meet them. And they said, we're building a house in Aspen, and we want as much free as possible. And I'm like, well, are you willing to do ads? What are we willing to publish? No, we don't want to publish. I said, good luck. I mean, really, what use are you to Benjamin Moore or Exquisite Services if they don't get a picture? If you want an ad, I can probably go some way to getting you free things. But I'm too freaking busy. So you need to hire somebody who, you know, wants to put, I mean, it's like doing a decorator's show house. I mean, this takes professional people a lot of time to get the product. For who? Not for me. I'm not making a markup from it. They're getting the free. I mean, no. The question is no. Unless they will publish. Because then if you're publishing, okay, I can publish Nicole Kidman's house, whatever, and thing. Like, there's a lot you'll do for that. But usually it's not A-type celebrities who want to publish their houses. It's like people on the D list. And they think like they've been in 2 seasons of, I'm just picking one over, Suits. And they think like, Meghan can get stuff, why can't I? And you're like, but no, that's a really hard, I mean, somebody should do an agency just to do that, to be between the client and the product placement and get paid by the brands. Because often an actor or somebody will call up and say, and I was like, what do they want? Because usually they want something. There's a pound of flesh to be had here, usually of yours. And some of them I adore, I love them, and they're long-term clients. And others are like short-term, like, so, I mean, they have to survive. God bless them.
This is amazing. I think we're going to be, you're going to be doing a book signing in the bar.
Okay, I've
and the
clocked
bar is
all of
open.
you. If
Yes.
I don't see you in the line.
Thank you so much, Peter, for being
Thank
here.
you.
It's incredible.
Thank you.
Amazing.